Hello, welcome back to episode 3 of Listen to Your Eyes, a podcast from Horizon Therapeutics for people who have a thyroid condition, such as Graves' disease, and are experiencing problems with their eyes. Throughout this series, you can learn more about thyroid eye disease, or TED, and hear from physicians, caregivers, and others who have discovered that their eye symptoms were actually TED. My name is Lauren Friedman. I'm a patient advocate and the host of Uninvisible Pod, a podcast about chronic invisible illness and disability. With a background in performance and my own list of chronic illness diagnoses, I'm here to serve this community and help bring some light into the darkness, quite literally today. We're talking all about the experience of those who care for or support someone living with thyroid eye disease, or TED. And joining me today is Debby VonLangen, wife of husband Rick, who has been living with Graves' disease and TED for 3 or 4 years now. Rick has given his permission for Debby to join us and talk about his experience with TED today. So welcome, Debby. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a real pleasure. And I was wondering if you could start off by telling us a little bit about you and Rick. How did you meet? And what made you realize he was the one? We all want to know.
Well, that starts with a prayer from my 9-year-old self. I was just a little girl. Rick and I actually belonged to the same church, and his congregation would often host our congregation in Buffalo. So as a little girl, my parents took me to church, and I sat there in Buffalo and noticed this older boy who always seemed to be out doing something. He was setting up chairs. He was holding up the hymn board for the choir. He was doing the audio. He just was always out there doing something, and that kind of caught my eye. And then and there, I said a little prayer and said, please let me find a Prince Charming just like that. So fast forward, and we're now celebrating our 46th wedding anniversary this year. Wow. It was kind of funny because a little divine humor that not only did God give me Prince Charming just like that, he gave me the real thing.
Yeah, I think that those prayers were pretty direct. You really, truly got just what you were asking for there, huh?
Yes.
That's really gorgeous. And wow, to be together 46 years, that's quite an accomplishment. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's get into thyroid eye disease. Let's talk about it. Can you tell us about life before Rick's diagnosis? And when did you or he first notice changes in his eyes?
We're in the unique situation of having all of our 4 children in the same city as us. So we now have 7 grandchildren, and they keep us very busy. And way back when, we had a very full life, of course, with our grandchildren and children, and things that we like to do. We like to go on hikes. Some of them were quite extensive. We were involved in church activities and just filling the day up as full as we can. Rick was working at the bank in a quite high stress job. So we just had a quality of life where we made use of just about every hour of the day.
And you were going outdoors. You have, 7 grandkids. That's amazing. 46 years. I'm not surprised, So it sounds like you had a pretty active and busy lifestyle, mentioning that Rick was working a pretty stressful job. When did you notice changes with his eyes? Like, when did this sort of diagnosis journey begin? Because it's fairly recent for both of you as well, isn't it?
Yeah, in 2018 is when it all started. We were very excited because Rick had decided he would retire, which was a huge decision. And February of 2018, he was recovering from the flu, and we decided we were going to go out and get some fresh air. He was feeling better. Well, fresh air in February in Buffalo is very fresh. So we came in from that walk, and Rick began to notice he wasn't feeling well. He had a terrible headache. He had a stomach ache. And we thought, well, maybe it's the flu coming back, a kind of a relapse. And his symptoms in the days that followed got worse and worse and worse. The doctor sent him to many specialists for his stomach and his heart, and everything just came up blank. But the symptoms didn't. He started to drop weight like lead. And he started to have trouble with his eyes. His eyes were tearing and red and sore and swollen. We just couldn't stop them from tearing. His heart rate was 180 at rest. He was running around the house, rapid fire asking questions, and he just was fight or flight mode.
So Rick was starting to show symptoms. And it sounds like you were going to lots of different specialists and not getting answers.
Yes.
So how did you end up discovering that like all of these separate symptoms were actually more related than not?
Well, in all that chaos, a simple blood test showed that he had his thyroid levels were non-existent. So at the meantime, he kept getting worse and worse. And by the time we got him to the endocrinologist, he was in a wheelchair. That's how bad it was. And through all of this, no one said to us, Graves or Graves' storm, which is what he was experiencing. No one ever said to us thyroid eye disease through all of this. So at the beginning of treatment, things started to improve slowly but surely, everything but his eyes. So, okay, go to the eye doctor, and we were told, well, we don't do anything about this unless you start to see double, unless you have double vision. So we came back home, and I said, something isn't right. He's just not getting all better. What's this thing going on with his eyes? They were bulging and sore and red. He had these big bags that were developing. His eyes were tearing so much, his shirt would get soaked. That's how bad it was. So I turned to the computer and I began to type in his symptoms. And what I found out, I came to the conclusion myself that he must have Graves. But
so he hadn't even been diagnosed with Graves' disease at that point.
No one ever said that word to us.
Wow. And this is so fascinating because often we hear from people like, don't go down the rabbit hole searching on the internet, right?
I know.
For diagnostics. And yet this was actually a tool that helped you bring this information to his specialists, it sounds like.
Well, that was a long time away. What I read about Graves was quite overwhelming. And it still really didn't explain his eye symptoms either. So one day, out of frustration, I just typed in the word cope. And what came up changed our life. Up came the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation. And not only that, they had a conference that they were going to be holding in a couple of weeks at the West Coast in San Diego. Well, we registered, got on a plane and flew to San Diego and attended that conference. And it was there where a doctor diagnosed him with Graves' disease. And then to our great surprise, you might say it's a real eye-opener, he was also diagnosed with thyroid eye disease. Wow. And we found out at the conference through these specialists that they were actually two separate diseases. And that explained why the treatment wasn't doing anything for his eyes.
Wow.
We came home, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
We came home armed with a lot of information, 2 fat notebooks of information, and with names of doctors here in Buffalo. And we got Rick a very good eye surgeon, very good eye specialist of TED.
Wow. I mean, how fortunate that you were able to find this on the internet. I mean, it's kind of the Wild West out there in its own way, right? You know, and to be able to find this conference and not only attend and learn more about Rick's diagnosis, but I'm sure also meet a lot of other people who were going through similar things, right?
Exactly.
So can you tell us about the steps you took to get care for Rick? I mean, obviously you found this surgeon who specialized in TED. It sounds like he was also getting treated for his Graves. Again, separate diagnoses, right? What has that journey looked like for Rick?
Well, at the beginning of treatment, everything took just a long time, and we learned to cope with it. We learned to use different methods to cope with it. My advice for people that are going through symptoms like this is to become given the lack of awareness of everything, just become as knowledgeable as possible about TED and find out as much as you can, and then go out armed with that information and find yourself a specialist. Because if you are knowledgeable, then you will know when you have the right doctor for you.
And really know how to advocate for either
Yes.
yourself or your loved one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, since Rick's diagnosis, can you tell us how your roles and relationship have changed too? Because obviously you were very independent up until a certain point, and then he sounds like he really needed your care. So how has that affected your relationship?
Yeah, so we were going through all these changes. He was retiring. I didn't even know what retirement was going to look like. I had some ideas about it, but usually he would take care of the more physical aspects of life, yard work and so on, and I would take, the housework, things like that. And I think now our roles have pretty much evened out because we help each other now. I'll go out and help him in the yard. We do things together, and he will come in and help me with housework, making the beds and cooking, and I think all of that brought us even closer because our roles kind of evened out. We found we could be much more productive that way. Yeah. And obviously he had to go through learning to live with the changes, all the changes, the disease, the two diseases, and retirement. And I had to learn how to be a caregiver. It was like somebody all of a sudden clipped a cape on me and said, "You're super caregiver." And to tell you the truth, I didn't know what to do at all. All I knew was that there was a flurry of things that needed to be done to take care of his eyes. There were eye drops and eye exercises. Things had to be done at a certain time of day. And I started to set alarm clocks and timers to help with that. And also with just emotional changes, observing his eyes and making sure that they didn't change too much. And,
It's a big responsibility.
Yes. Yeah. And also just bolstering him up and saying, you're still my Prince Charming and I still love you and we can do this together.
Yeah. What were the most unexpected changes that you had to make aside from like setting these alarms and, really keeping an eye on him? Like, was there anything that really, really surprised you in the midst of all that?
I wouldn't say surprise as much as it was kind of an adventure, I would call it. And it helps to approach it with a certain amount of curiosity because life changed so suddenly for us. And we had to view everything we did just automatically through Rick's thyroid eye disease. When we would go outside, we would have to make sure he had his sunglasses and his hat. If we go to a restaurant, we would have to make sure that he wasn't facing a window where the sun was coming in. And if we were with our kids, we maybe took a little more subtle role. We weren't quite as active.
Yeah, big changes. I'm wondering as well if you could share a little bit about how Rick has dealt with all this. I know you mentioned that you have to bolster his self-esteem sometimes, perhaps making sure that he knows that he is still your Prince Charming. And I'm wondering how he's processed it, both mentally and emotionally, and what that has been like for him as he's accepted these changes in his routine too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would describe him as the embodiment of the Serenity Prayer. And I know he's in the next room laughing right now because given his type A personality, he would think that, maybe he would disagree with that. but he's very analytical and very logical, and he accomplishes so much in life because he will not give up. This isn't his first rodeo with a disease. He just will not give up. And his logical side helps him to accept his physical limitations without the emotions getting in the way. And he might not be the guy anymore on the roof installing the church's satellite dish, but he's going to do everything within his capabilities with that same gusto that he always did. So he's still my Rick.
Yeah. Well, and this is so important for listeners to understand as well, that like this diagnosis didn't fundamentally change who he was. It just meant a few adjustments.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
I also hear that there's an acronym that you made, AGAPE. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Like I said before, there were a lot of things I had to get used to doing, and just things that had to be done during the day. And in the beginning, I wanted to teach myself how to take care of all those things without forgetting it. So when you're a caregiver for someone with a chronic disease, it's not without some personal sacrifice. You have to change a little bit who you are too. You have to reach a higher level of patience and love. And what better word to use for an acronym than AGAPE, which is defined as the highest form of love.
Beautiful.
Yes.
What does that look like for you? How are you using each letter? Yeah, tell us about what they all symbolize.
I'll break it down. So the A is accompany him to the doctor so that I can listen and know how to better take care of him. G is give reminders. Did you take your eye drops? Did you do your eye exercises and so on? A is for ask how he's doing. How are you feeling today? And observe any changes with his eyes. P is point out hazards along the path. Kind of a simple little thing so we don't use a lot of words when we're walking. If I see a curb that's funny or there's a stick in the way, I'll say trip. And that way he can say, oh yeah, or he'll say, oh, I saw that. And another interesting thing is I wanted everybody to be aware of patterns on carpets, because that can really cause a problem for someone with low eyesight, especially patterns on carpets at stairs, which you find in a hotel lots of times.
All the time. Yeah.
It can make a person with no problem dizzy. So that's something just to be aware of.
Yeah, I really appreciate that level of awareness. And then was there an E on the end there too? Did we do the E?
The E on the end is embrace my role as a caregiver, embrace the new normal, and seek support if it's needed, and just carve out some time. It's very important to carve out some time for yourself. A lot of caregivers, especially in the beginning, they say, okay, I can do this. I'm the power source. Just plug me in and I will take care of everything. But the truth is, you can't do it alone. No one can do all of this alone. You need your family and your friends to support you. It might be a good idea to find a support group that will help you along too. And by all means, if you like to paint or draw or read or write or listen to music, carve out some time for yourself to do that so you can recharge.
I love that. And I love that the embracing your self-care as a caregiver is as important as embracing caring for Rick. I mean, that's so much of what this conversation is about, really. And we're going to talk more about some of those resources in a bit as well. I'm wondering, are there any routines or devices that you use to make sure that Rick has the things that he needs, aside from AGAPE itself, and some of the alarms that you mentioned, like what are the devices that you use to keep things running smoothly in your routine?
Well, it's good to keep everything in its place, to have a place for everything so you can find it, so you're not looking for the hat when you're running around. And it's also important to keep a good sense of humor through all of this. And the guy for us to do that is my 4-foot dinosaur named Clive.
A 4-foot dinosaur? Okay, you're going to need to explain this one to me.
I can show you in a minute.
Oh, I'd love to see Clive.
He stands at the foot of our bed, and on his head is Rick's big hat. On his eyes are his sunglasses. In his arm is his eye mask. And when we wake up and look up, there he is standing there with his goofy grin and all his get up. And how can you not start the day with a smile in your heart and a chuckle? And he's just our reminder that you have to keep things light and positive. Start each day that way.
And also, it sounds like part of that is having that routine where you have these small items that are real necessities that can easily get lost in a house. You know, making sure that they have a home base, right? And yours is a home base that makes you smile.
That's right. That's right.
I love that. Your story is so inspiring, and you manage to keep doing many of the things that you enjoy together too, it sounds like. So can you talk to us a bit about that? Like you mentioned the hiking earlier on. Are you still doing that and being able to go on more active adventures even with diagnosis?
You'd be surprised what you can do with just toning things down a little bit. We still love to travel, but we pack a little lighter. If we're out somewhere, we make sure we come home and go back to the hotel if we're out traveling and just take a rest. It's important for him to close his eyes for at least an hour a day. So we keep that up even when we're on vacation. We still like our walks. We can go on our walks. With hikes, we have to be a little more selective now. We're not going to go into dangerous gorges or anything like that, but we can still do a lot of it. We just do less of it. It reminds me of when one body part doesn't function anymore and another body part becomes stronger and kind of takes over. We just have to be creative and do things within the context of the thyroid eye disease.
Absolutely. And it sounds like it just involves maybe a little more planning in advance sometimes, but it doesn't mean that this diagnosis has to strip you of your passions or your interests or really anything else in life, huh?
We still learn to live our best life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Through the AGAPE that you mentioned earlier. That's right. The key. Debby, you seem to do an amazing job of balancing your own self-care and care for Rick through his diagnosis and treatment. And I was wondering if you were able to share any ways. You mentioned, finding support groups and things earlier, but any more specific ways that you'd recommend that caregivers make space to care for themselves?
Oh, yes. Having been through this experience, I'll say it again, it's important to have people and family around you. No one can do this alone. You don't have to be alone. Sometimes it might seem that way, especially in the beginning, but that's the time that you just have to reach out because your loved one needs that. And as a caregiver, you certainly need that too, physically, with physical help, as well as with emotional help. And the best way to do that is, number one, get as close as you can with your family and your friends who want to help, and let them support you, even if it's in a very small way, to give you a little space of time or a little breathing room. And number two, find your tribe. So important to search for these groups that are going through the same thing you are going through. Our life changed so much when we found the Graves Disease and Thyroid Foundation. And we went to that conference. We made friends there that we'll have all of our life. And it's still one of my favorite resources. You can find anything under the sun there. And even for thyroid eye disease as well. I also like looking at Listen to Your Eyes and looking at all the comments that are there. And it still astonishes me how much lack of information there is out there and people seeking to help. But just go in there and read all the information that's there. And you can comment on the remarks people make, and maybe you can help them. And maybe you will find help for whatever it is you're going through. You never know. It's a real adventure. It's a great way to approach it. You
I love
might,
that. Yeah, that positivity, the idea of an adventure. This isn't like
yes,
a death sentence. This is actually a new adventure that you can take on together.
yes. I would approach it with curiosity and with a sense of adventure because you kind of, you've kind of stepped over into a new type of life, a new chapter in life. And the best way to discover a new city is to use that frame of mind, that adventurous frame of mind. You never know what you're going to come up with.
Yeah, this is travel through your relationship with someone, just as it would be traveling through a city you didn't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah,
your favorite resources seem to have been through the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation and obviously Listen to Your Eyes, huh?
exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
You can also go online and find other support groups. There are plenteous out there. You can even find a life coach that will help you through some of the pitfalls in life if you have the means to do that. The more you talk or write diaries, journals, the more it'll help.
Yeah.
And you may, like I said, you may not be living the same life that you lived before, but it's still possible to live the best life that you have now.
I think that's so beautifully said. And really, this is about not only are patients not alone, but caregivers aren't alone either. I mean, there's a number of resources that you've just shared with us that obviously you've taken advantage of yourself in some ways. And
Mm-hmm.
knowing that there are communities out there and they're growing, and that you're not the only person who's going through an experience like this. It sounds like it's been really central to your emotional journey there too, huh?
It's been life changing.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that any of this has been life changing for both of you, but it's just so beautiful to hear how really seamlessly you have incorporated this diagnosis and life changing diagnosis into your day to day and embraced those changes. And I'm just very grateful that you were able to join us today and share your story as well as Rick's story. And thank you so much for shedding light on, this condition that we're all learning more and more about every day.
And thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Absolutely. And thanks all for listening. You can join us again for the next episode when we hear from others living and thriving with Graves' disease and TED, including tips for managing TED in professional and social settings. For more information about thyroid eye disease, visit thyroideyes.com and join the Listen to Your Eyes Facebook and Instagram communities. To find a TED specialist in your area, visit teddoctors.com. Until next time, listen to your eyes.